Hey, everybody. How's everybody doing? Quick little help on my end. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, could you please leave me a comment because I have no audio on my end, which is kind of crazy. So I'm kind of doing this a little bit blind. So if you could give me a shout real quick, give me a like, give me a heads up. It's telling me my audio is going out to you guys on your end, but I can't hear me at all. So if you could do me a favor real quick and just leave me a quick little comment wherever you are that you can hear me, that would be fantastic. All right. Yes, much better. That's a good sign. Love that. Thank you. No clicking tonight. I just don't know what's going on now because I have my earbuds in, but I just can't hear anything. So Jonathan Redford's in, Linda Gosnell's in, Mike Lane. I think I just saw Mike Lane. Good to see you guys. Interesting topic tonight. I hope all of you are well. Hello to all my Instagram folks too. This is a touchy subject. So, and I will start with a disclaimer that I have to probably put out there is like, I am not a doctor. I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. However, we're going to talk about some pretty interesting perspective, I think, on the medical community. For those of you that may be listening to me down the road who are doctors, don't get offended. Don't get your back up. If you get your back up, I know a lot about you already. And so I am here to shed some light on a rather assumptive, is that the word? Assumptive ideas around how we should treat injuries, how we should treat athletes who have injuries. And yeah, I'm just going to share what I know, and I'm going to share my experiences and with both myself and with athletes who I have worked with and athletes who I've been around. Okay, and um, so first and foremost, I'll tell everybody that I don't want this to put the fear of God in you to whoever it is you're working with currently. That's not my intention here. Okay, but I am going to share some things tonight that are a little bit that go against the grain. Okay, so those of you that know me know that I work with aspiring athletes and their families, athletes who really want to make stuff happen. Um, this is so along those lines. I go against a lot of what you may hear in other groups and other forums on sidelines, at the water cooler. I'm not afraid to share that because I know ultimately that your athlete has big dreams and we want them to happen. Okay, now when it comes to injuries, I want to start right away by saying that injuries do not have to be an inevitability, right? They don't have to be it's going to happen eventually sort of things. I disagree very much with the attitude that athletes are mechanical, just like a car. And that's a lot of how the medical profession treats athletes is very mechanistically. We use terms like they've got a lot of mileage on them, or it was bound to happen. That they're running low on gas, they're running low on oil, like whatever it is, right? They've got Then there's also the argument that and this one's kind of this has got a lot of publicity over the last like 15 years or so, especially in North America. But this idea that your athlete has to play all sorts of sports and that will then therefore make them injury proof. And what's really fascinating about that is that was debunked a number of years ago, but it never makes the press, right? It never makes the lexicon of like your everyday coach. They've just heard it and they're rehashing it and they're regurgitating it like, hey, your athlete needs to play multiple sports in order for them to be, well-rounded and work different muscles, like whatever the hell that is. Like we all have the same amount of muscles. It's not like we're all of a sudden gaining some new ones. But the idea that like there's actually been research that shows that lack of sleep is a bigger indicator of injury proneness than if you actually played multiple sports or not. Okay. I always laugh at that one because, and I didn't for the longest time. I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like I was a multi-sport athlete, but I'm beat up. Like, and so I'm not necessarily sure where that came from, but the idea was that like if you play multiple sports, that somehow you will have resiliency towards injury. And I just personally have just haven't found that to be true. Um, but also we have this other thing that you watch the best soccer players in the world, and they've primarily only grown up ever playing one sport. So what the hell's that? Right? Like what are we doing? So the idea then comes, well, what are we doing to basically help our athletes stay injury free so that they don't have to go to a doctor or anybody like that. But then once they do go to a doctor, what do we do about that? Like, do we even have to go to a doctor? Because I'm here to tell you tonight that that's not always the best the best method or the best first path. Okay, so the reason I started this, or the reason I decided to dive into this topic tonight, of all things, is because I was in a soccer forum the other day, and this woman posted a question. It's one of those questions that come in a lot of groups. Like, basically, this woman already knows the answer, and or knows her answer, and she's just looking for approval. And the thing that I worry about the most when people are just kind of posting in random groups is what I call, like, for lack of a better term, like middle class athlete think. Okay, so talking about high performance sport is a lot like talking about wealth, right? It gets people kind of weird. It seems kind of pretentious, right? And so if you think about your everyday circles, it's wealth is not something you talk about, right? Well, high performance sport is something that people would like to have, but what ends up happening is that the general population gets really weirded out by some of the decisions. And so, like, in this last couple months, like, we saw, like, LeBron James's son, who is a up and coming basketball player. He's like a 4-star recruit, which can or can't doesn't necessarily isn't always a good thing. But he had knee surgery. Like, and I can't remember how old he is. He's not very young. Like, if you guys Google that, you can probably find out. But people are like, oh my God, he's just playing basketball all the time, and by the time he gets to the NBA, he's gonna be useless. He's not gonna have the ability. He won't be able to play because he's been all beat up. And like, that to me is like middle class athlete think. Okay, it's like, yeah, okay, we should play less, we should rest more, we should play multiple sports, we should take a break. And the truth is that your athlete may not like any other sport than the one that they play, right? They may have made that decision a long time ago, and it's different now because your athlete may have made the decision to play their sport or compete in their sport because all the other sports around where you are not nearly as fun or exciting or well run as the one that you're playing or you have been playing. And so, and then for my athletes who are national team athletes, like skiers or luge athletes or bobsledders or figure skaters or gymnasts and things like that, the idea of like, hey, like, we've got the Olympic dream, let's go. That's going to drive you too, and then everything else becomes a bit of a distraction, right? Because while coaches will talk a good game about saying, like, yeah, you should play multiple sports, when it comes down to it, if your team or your program has got something coming up and you're pretty good and they want you to be with them, they're gonna give you every excuse under the sun to play and not leave, right? So my idea to that is like, well, if your athlete is committed to playing, the idea is like, well, what can we do to make them bulletproof, like, physically bulletproof? And what I wanted to, like, so I wrote a comment back to this woman in this group, because what she asked was, like, her son had been injured, and they had driven like 2 hours to go to a tournament that their team was playing, but her son couldn't play. And so, despite not being able to play, so that I kind of envisioned there was like this kid, and there was like maybe two other kids who were also there but not playing. So they're in their sweats, they're in their team gear, but they're not playing, and their team has lost the game. And so the coach, after the game, kind of goes off, and and so what this woman posted was like the coach got really upset and was like, the reason why these guys are injured is because their fitness is horrible, and that they shouldn't go to doctors because doctors will tell them to rest. And so everybody in this group basically like piled on. It was like, yeah, the coach should be fired. That coach shouldn't be working with children. Shouldn't be working with young athletes. That coach doesn't have a medical degree. He didn't go through 8 years of school and certifications, blah, 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 whatever. He should be giving that advice. He should be reported to like the president of the league and lose his job, like yada, yada, yada. And I was like, that's a pile of horse crap. So I'm gonna type in my 2 cents. Of course, that with like crickets, right? Absolute crickets. And so what people said, so basically what I said was like, listen, medical doctors, especially surgeons, are not always the best people to talk to about your young aspiring athlete. Now, full disclaimer, if your athlete has a broken leg or something similar, and they go see a surgeon and the surgeon says you have a broken leg and you don't listen to them, you're the idiot. Okay, not me, you are. Okay, so I just got to get that out there. But my point was that okay, listen, what this coach is saying, your coach, whether you like them or not, your coach is there to push your athlete. Okay, now the word push has its own, it's a sliding scale, right? For me, it's one movement. For you, it might be something else, right? So all this advice giving, especially by the coach, is that you will end up um, uh, deciding, and this goes back to my when values and performance collides talk. So if you go to athletespecific.com and look in the article section, just search for when values and performance collide. This is what happens. So the coach in this case is venting. He's frustrating. His team just lost. He's probably got some of his best players on his team who are on the sideline primarily because the doctor that they saw for whatever injury it was has said you shouldn't be playing. And so now that coach vents and says, "Hey, your fitness. The reason why you're injured is because your fitness is bad." And what the coach is thinking is that I know that if my athlete is taking more time off, resting, right, which is the typical advice from a MD, is that those athletes are going to get further and further behind and more prone to injury later, right? And what is doubly frustrating this coach is that those athletes are already, he's making a comparison in his head, not to some like ideal, because it's rare that a coach compares you to some like idealistic entity, right? So usually what they're doing is they're comparing you to the other kids on their team, and they know that they've got other kids on that same team who are able to withstand practice and are doing the things he's asking him or them to do, and they're surviving. Okay, so that's that. So I wrote a big long post and I said, hey, listen, here's the deal. You guys may hate this coach, okay, but that's not the point. The coach is actually giving you some good advice, right? Basically, he's seeing a bigger problem. Now, I don't believe that like some coaches, yes, they can be a bit of a jerk. But the question is this, is like, you knew as a parent, you knew as an athlete going into this team what this coach was like. And if you didn't, kind of shame on you, man. You've got to be looking ahead, understanding environment, people, places, and things to be like, what's this coach going to be like? What are they going to ask us to do? Talk to past teammates, talk to past parents, find out what it is that they their experience was with this coach, and be prepared. Okay. Now, there are two types of injuries, in my opinion, like just big generalities. One is the acute injury, like someone took an axe to your leg and now it's broken. That's one type of injury. The other injury is more chronic, more building, and the one is easier to see than the other. Okay, so if you blow out your knee, that's we unless we get some sort of MRI pre-practice every day, we may or may not be able to see that, right? So sometimes an athlete can just get unlucky, and that's unfortunate. But as I've gotten away from being a active sport person, and I've read and I've learned and I've looked at other athletes in other sports, I will tell you this, that the culture within your sport, whatever it is, and within your team can affect the injuries your athlete faces. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Some groups of athletes can become injury magnets. I shared the story. I can't remember if it was with you guys or not, but years ago, I coached a group of luge kids from Canada, drove down to Salt Lake City to train. So we're in beautiful Park City, Utah, training on the Olympic track there. Just a great place to be. And we're there for like 10 days. And a couple days in, one of our athletes has this weird little crash. And at the time, these athletes were like 13, 14 years old, right? So a little young for some of you listening, but the point is this, is that one of the athletes like crashed, got into trouble, tweaked her ankle. Off we go to the hospital, right? Off we go to the little medical clinic in Park City, and x-rays are done. Nothing's broken, but they tape her up, tell her, hey, you should have some rest, and give her some crutches, and off we go. And the next day, I get another athlete, same issue, same trip to the medical clinic, nothing broken, crutches, there you go. By the end of the 10 days, we had like 5 kids on crutches. And what I realized at that time, like only when I got back to Calgary, talking to some other coaches and understanding what was going on, I was taught this idea of that sometimes, athletes can be looking for attention. Okay. And injury is a way to look for attention. Now, a lot of the parents listening to me right now, you're like, no, not my kid. That's offensive. Hold up. Right. Let me just dovetail that with another concept, which is the body always finds a way to rest. Okay. And so sometimes athletes can be stressed out, not just by the sport they're playing, but life in general. Okay. An athlete I worked with years ago who had a mom who got diagnosed with cancer and a father who lost his job. The next day, this athlete came down with I think it was a knee injury and was out for the rest of the season. And what people told this athlete was like, hey, it's probably a blessing in disguise. You can take a break a little bit. You've gone through a lot. Yeah, exactly. Now, I learned that concept from an Italian coach I had years ago when I was competing in the sport of luge. A guy named Carl Brunner, this crazy little mountain man. Like an icon in the sport, but he was like, the body always finds a way to rest. And I never forgot that. And so sometimes when an athlete comes down with what looks like a unfortunate, unlucky injury, like an ACL or an ankle or a concussion, it's, if your athlete was like fully rested and hydrated and ready to go, do you think they would have had that injury? Right? Usually the answer to that is no. Even if it's like some crazy slide tackle on a soccer game. The idea there is that if your athlete is like at the top of his or her game, that they should be able to avoid those injuries, right? And that's really the ideal that I'd like you to have for your athlete. Because what can happen is that the general population, like kind of that middle class athlete think, is like, oh my God, she's been playing a lot. He's been playing a lot. Hope she doesn't get hurt. And the athlete can then buy into that. I saw this mom post the other day. She goes, oh, my athlete's all injury prone. No, you're basically projecting that onto your athlete. That's not cool. Okay. That's not cool. So you've got to watch as a parent and as a family what your thoughts are about injuries. If you basically tell your kid, hey, you're bad at math, guess what? You're perpetuating this idea that they're just bad at math over and over and over again. And it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. That same thing can happen with injuries. So I don't want you to fall into this think that, hey, athletes get hurt all the time. Athletes that play one sport are bound to get injured all the time. No, athletes who don't have enough sleep, which your athlete probably doesn't, athletes who have been trying to manage like school and sports or travel and school and sports, and they're not getting rest, and they maybe had a couple pops on the weekend with their buddies, which they probably shouldn't have done, but they did it anyway, right? These are all things that add up to the fatigue factor. Now, in a sport I see this a lot is in skiing. Skiing, it's like everybody's expected to blow out a knee. Like, that's crap, in my opinion. Like, who wants that, right? More importantly, the idea is like, how can we make our athletes bulletproof so that they can withstand unusual um, unusual angles of attack, unusual situations. How can we make our athletes be able to survive in weird situations? And so regardless of how your athlete gets injured, I want you to understand that you've got to be really careful that you as a parent aren't perpetuating it. Your athlete isn't looking forward to it. And because that can really be a factor here. So once you're so whichever coach you're working with, right, you should know about that coach. And you have to prepare that, like, let's say you get recruited to a team or a program by one coach, and then you show up at the season and, oh, they're not coaching now. It's like the assistants are coaching. You've got to know you've got to plan ahead. Your athletes have to plan ahead. You got to understand, like, okay, what are we going to be up against this year? Does your athlete have a history of injury already? Right? What have those injuries been? Have they rehabbed sufficiently? Not just to a point where they were, beyond where they were. Okay. Now, one of the things that I wish I had been taught when I was younger was, I was asked this on a podcast by a guy named Christian Bosa, who's a German trained sport, like physio strength and conditioning guy in the Netherlands. And he asked me, like, what do I wish I knew when I was young as an athlete? And I wish I had known the concept of maintaining joint integrity. Okay. Now, so what that means is can we create a body that's resilient in multiple angles of attack, right? So, and this is where, like, hey, if you're running in straight lines all the time, and then all of a sudden you have to cut, your body's not really ready for that. So, Ryan Hurst, who is a guy that I know, runs GMB.io, goldmedalbodies.io, GMB.io, runs all sorts of programs on that keep a body like loose and flexible because, and this is a concept that is really not brought enough into the high performance athlete world. Okay. Whether it's tennis, whether it's motocross, whether it's speed skating, whether it's football, we tend to get into these kind of uh, these tracks. It's these tracks of training. It's like, we're going to squat, we're going to lunge, we're going to lateral lunge, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, whatever it is. The idea is that every sport has what I call their training incest. Okay. And so I use that term because, and I got it from a book called Getting Everything You Can Out of All You've Got by a guy named Jay Abraham. And so the concept here is, okay, what happens typically in business is, like, if I own a gas station, is that I'm going to look at all the other gas stations around me and see what they're doing and do what they're doing so that I can be successful just like them. And so that's what he terms as kind of marketing and business incest, is that you're looking within your sport and you're looking for just those ideas and you're going to outwork your competitor. Well, that's not sustainable. Okay. You can outwork your competitor for, about 5 or 10%. And then what ends up happening is that they start working, and then now everybody's back again and they're all the same, right? So there's the incest term. Okay. I know it's kind of creepy, but it makes a lot of sense. Where true advancements come is when you look outside of your business or your sport and you look for a concept and apply it. Most famously, it's when banks had drive-through windows, right? And then fast food joints added drive-through windows, and now we can't even imagine life without drive-through windows at fast food joints, right? Like, so I can remember driving through Europe, and when we would leave one venue to go to another, the first place we always went was like McDonald's. And man, if we hit that drive-through, we were like happy, right? And off we got on the Autobahn and off we went. And I still do that to this day, right? I had a drive-through this morning. How about you? But the point is that looking outside of your sport, and the thing that I look for athletes now is this idea of becoming physically bulletproof. And how do we do that? How do we create a body that keeps us from getting injured so that we don't ever have to see a doctor? Okay. Now, so I'm going to encourage all of you to look at your athlete and go, all right, this is something that pretty much every athlete can benefit from. an early morning routine, an evening routine, a pre-match routine, whatever. One of the things that has really hurt a lot of sports is this concept of like dynamic warm-ups. Okay. So there was a study done ages ago that basically uh, that found that if they took sprinters and took a group of sprinters and had them do a static warm up or static stretching, it made them slower when they sprinted. They took another group and they had them do a dynamic warm up, and oh my God, those sprinters were faster. Well, that's great if you're a world class sprinter, but if you're like an up and coming athlete and you're inflexible, you can use some mobility work and probably some static stretching to reduce the tension, the muscle tension that you've got as a growing teen, right? And so this is really, I worked with a group of tennis players a number of years ago, and man, every one of those tennis players, as talented as they were, some of the top kids in Canada, man, you could play the banjos off their hamstrings, right? Why? They do dynamic warm-ups every day, but they're not making any improvement to their athletic kind of resiliency. Okay, so that's all about like getting your athlete to a point where they don't ever have to see a doctor in this case. Okay, so let's uh, let's move to when you actually have to finally go to one. Okay, so just a personal story. I got diagnosed with tendonitis in both my knees when I was 12 years old. And I had it all through high school. And the protocol back then was this idea of like, so, I went to a doctor. He said I should rest and ice. That was it. That was all I was told. Rest and ice. Then I got to see a physical therapist, and that physical therapist, okay, we're going to work the last like 10 degrees of range of your knee, and we're going to strengthen this little tiny bit range of motion, and that's going to make your patella better. And the patella is your kneecap, for those of you guys that don't know. Then I went out and I would play my sport, and not really knowing enough about this at the time, I'm working in every range of motion that's not that last 10 degrees, right? Those last 10 degrees are when you're standing up. But what are you doing as a lacrosse player, as a soccer player, as whatever? You are like lunging and decelerating and accelerating and all this stuff. Looking back on that time in my life, as painful as my knees were, I was told to basically baby my knees and rest them. And we are really kind of away from this like rest and get better attitude. We just know that the body is more resilient than that. Now, even if you have like broken your leg, there are active things your athlete should be doing. Now, what happens is if you like this woman on that soccer post that I told you about before, she had taken her son already to a top doctor, and this doctor was a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon, and he also happened to be on like he was also the U.S. snowboard doctor, and he was also the doctor at some professional baseball team. And I hear that, and I'm like, whatever, dude. Like that doesn't impress me at all because a lot of times those doctors are not there on merit; they are there because they have kind of played the networking game involved to get some of those roles. Like, I know there's some people listening to me now that would agree that sometimes, and I didn't know this as a young athlete. I thought, hey, when I got to the Olympic Training Center, man, all the strength coaches, all the physical therapists, all the doctors I ran into, these are going to be the best doctors in the world. It wasn't true. Now, the physical therapist at the training center, there was Stu Snouse and Kevin Moody. They were phenomenal. They were so used to working with athletes who don't want to stop and don't want to rest, and they know the mindset of an elite athlete. They also knew that telling an athlete to stop does very little, like to help them when they come back. Right. The idea now is that so these a lot of times a doctor or surgeon, they're not they're not used to that. These doctors would come to the Olympic Training Center and they come in like 2-week rotations, so they could basically put it on their resume and say, "Hey, I was a U.S. Olympic Training Center doctor." Yeah, woohoo! Right? They would get there and they would assume we were all healthy. They wouldn't necessarily know what to do, and they were just as shocked, like the pain tolerance and the resilience that we all had. So my general like guidance, advice to an aspiring athlete is your first plan of attack is to not just run to some orthopedist or some surgeon, because they will look at you very mechanistically. They will look at your feet and say they're flat. You need arches. They will look at your knees and say, "Oh, your angles are off, and this is you're going to lose a kidney because now your knee doesn't work right." They'll just say like, "You should stop." And then when give it 2 weeks and then come back. Oh, by the way, take some ibuprofen. Now, regardless of your medical affinities, okay, like I will share some things here that I've learned very, very much like, and not, what I'm about to share with you borders on like almost like a anti-vaccination approach. Like if you are like cringy to that stuff, what I'm about to share with you may be kind of weird. But one thing I learned, like you're looking at a guy who has two metal hips, right? Who basically gave his body for sport. Okay. And through the process of dealing with like really advanced, like basically wearing down on my hip joints, I learned a lot about like the advice I was given for ibuprofen was actually really, really not great. And I learned this because I called the doctor that invented the hip replacements that I have over in Birmingham, England, and I called his office. And wouldn't you know it, in England, they don't prescribe ibuprofen because they know it degrades bone density and bone development, and it degrades cartilage. And so, if you've been handing ibuprofen to your athlete all these years, I don't blame you for doing it, but I'm just going to encourage you now, like, hey, probably not the best idea because it can hinder like your body's own ability to heal. And especially for our North American families and North American athletes, this is going to come as like a holy shit moment. Like you probably given ibuprofen to your athletes since whenever. If you haven't, fantastic, great for you. But what they'll give, like, so when I was researching the surgery I was going to have, over in England, it's like you have the surgery done. They're basically giving you a couple aspirin and off you go. Right? And I was like, that's fantastic. Right. And very different from our North American counterparts. So you got to understand that's something that when you look at your doctors and their approaches, I use the term like a lot of doctors are hammers and your athlete looks like a nail. But what if your athlete is like a screw or a staple, right? You don't need a hammer for that, right? You need a toolbox. And so I use the toolbox analogy a lot. So I believe like great coaches and great advisors, someone like me, others, basically we are a toolbox and we are a facilitator of the tools that go in that toolbox for your athletes. So what you want to understand is that, yes, your team may have a doctor, your program may have a doctor. That's all well and good, but you need to take it upon yourself to find a grouping of health practitioners that can provide guidance to your athlete. Now, belief is a really big thing. One of the things that I find, this will blow your mind. One of the things I find really interesting, and we got Jason Stacy on here, who I shared a message with him last week. Back pain. A lot of parents can deal with, everybody can relate to back pain on some scale. There's a book by a guy named Dr. John Sarno. He passed away a number of years ago in his 90s, but he was a physician at NYU, and years ago he realized that people would come in with debilitating back pain, and they would take an X-ray of their back and find out that the spine was pristine, not a single blemish in it at all, no slipped discs, no cracked vertebrae, nothing. But they complained of serious back pain. On further research, he also found out that there were people who had ridiculously beat up spines, busted discs, busted disc, like busted vertebrae, things like that. But then these people complained of no pain. And so what he basically came to the conclusion of, and there's a lot of people that swear by Dr. John Sarno's work. I recommend you get this book, Healing Back Pain, just to blow your mind, just to be open to a new concept. But a lot of celebrities have gone to see him. He's in New York, and people always ask, well, why doesn't his knowledge get out to the general public? And the bottom line of that, guys, is that it just doesn't sell pills. It's not good for the pharmaceutical industry. And in North America, especially, we are driven by the pharmaceutical industry. And a lot of times our industry and our doctors are also affected by that. Like they see certain types of research that are funded by those things. This is a fact. I'm not making this up. This is just the real deal. So John Sarno's work, I encourage every athlete to read that because I know athletes who have competed on torn ACLs and you wouldn't know it. I've known athletes to get hit by a blowing plastic bag in the grocery store parking lot and complain that they got a concussion, right? So you're going to fall somewhere on that scale, right? You're going to fall somewhere on that scale. And it's important to understand where on that scale you sit and then what advice you need and what you believe in. Because if you believe 100% that ibuprofen is going to solve your problem, then go ahead. If you believe that eating ice is going to solve all your problems, go ahead. If you need to go find like the down of a rare duck off the coast of Iceland and that's going to be your lucky charm, go for it. But the point is that you need to wrap yourself around these concepts so that you don't just fall for the only concept that you've been given. When I was in high school, trying to become an All-American in the sport of lacrosse, trying to compete in the sport of luge, trying to be an ice hockey goalie and all this stuff and dealing with tendonitis in my knees, the advice I got was to rest, right? It was just stop, don't do anything. I didn't have time for that. Okay. Now, what this does though is there is a pressure now in athletics. There is a pressure that you need to be at a certain level to get noticed and seen at various stages. And if you're not, you're going to get passed over. It's going to be very hard to keep up. That is a fact. Like that is not something that's going to go away. It's only going to get more difficult. Why? We're in a competitive situation. Anytime you're in a competitive situation, whether it's sports or it's business, there is somebody near you, next to you, somebody with a like close to you in the world rankings that they are not going to have to deal with injury for a little bit. They're going to push through and they're going to pass you. The point though is that if you're in this for the long haul, then you will usually withstand more pressure over the long haul. If you work in spikes, that's when injury occurs. Okay. So if you are undertrained and then all of a sudden you've got to push through preseason workouts, you're going to get stressed. Like when you watch the tennis, like we just had the Australian Open, and in the world of tennis, which is probably the first major sporting event we've really seen, um, like everybody flies down to Australia. There's a couple planes that come down with COVID. Guys they have to basically get hard quarantine in a hotel for 2 weeks in Australia. Australia's been pretty badass about this. But then what are these guys doing and girls doing? They're training in the hotel rooms, like doing what they can with what they've got. But the idea is that they've got to keep this level high enough so that they don't hit the court and then get injured. And athletes did. But the idea is that you need to be proactive on this and go like, what do we know it's coming? How can we survive, right? How can we be proactive and not reactive? Because God forbid you blow out an ACL and now you're kind of done, right? But you probably can look back to 3, 6, 9 months prior to this time and go, you know what? There's probably things I could have done better here. And that goes back to taking 100% responsibility. You got to take 100% responsibility on these things. As tough as it is, as hard as it sounds, like you gotta go, all right, what could I have done to avoid this? Even if you get taken out by like some drone with a rocket from the stands and it hits you in the knee, how could you avoid that? Like what's going on? How could, you got to be thinking like that. So beware of the advice to just rest. Okay. And don't necessarily jump right to some orthopedic doctor. In my experience, they are usually the last person you want to see because they're very mechanistic. I've seen when I had my hips finally taken care of, it took 18 months for me to finally get the okay and find the right doctor with the right diagnosis for what I was dealing with. One of the surgeons I went to told me it was just a pain I was going to have to live with for the rest of my life. Thanks, doc. And he was a Team Canada ice hockey doctor. Full of shit. Anyway, I kept pressing. Finally got to the next, got a referral to another surgeon. That surgeon just put me on cortisone injections and said, just do this, do this. He was looking at me like, you're too young. You're too young. You're too young. But when I did some digging, I realized that he only does hip replacements, which is basically they lop off the top of your femur and drive a spike down your femur and put a metal ball on you like that, and then put a cup in your pelvis. He was waiting for me to be bad enough to basically say, like, all right, now I can do the total hip on you. Okay. But through my own research, I realized, like, okay, there's another procedure called a Birmingham hip resurfacing. Okay. Andy Murray, who's a very famous British tennis player, won Wimbledon. He is famously coming back from a Birmingham hip replacement as well. So I had a double done on the same day. This was a couple years ago now, and but it took me like this is in my 40s. I still had to remind myself, you got to find the doctor that's going to give you the right advice for you. Okay, the right advice for you. And that isn't necessarily going to be the doctor that's the easiest one to get to, or the one who's got a connection with your team. A lot of times as athletes, doctors look at us like either mechanistically or that there should be nothing wrong with us. And I can't remember the last time I had a physical from a sports doctor, like when I was competing. It's because they're just like, oh yeah, you're good. I could have had cancer, right? Like whatever, they would have never found it. All right. But that's the deal. What I want you to do though is I want you to find I have had better luck with sports physical therapists, okay? And not like, and this is gonna sound weird, guys, but not like just some general sports physio. Like you've got to find one that has dealt and worked with high performance athletes. Even if you don't think your athlete is high performance, they are. If you're listening to me, your athlete is higher performance than most. Okay. The idea here is that, I mean, we've got people listening to me right now that have Olympians under their professional athletes under their belt, um, you know, collegiate Division One athletes, whatever. If your athlete is like playing at East, whatever state, and they're just seeing the field, they're still above average. You got to find a physio who's proactive, and that's just going to take you some work. It's going to take you some research, because not only we're trying to get your athlete better from injury back to where they were, we want them beyond where they were. Okay. Now the cool thing is, if you break something, a lot of times bones heal better. Like it's oftentimes you're wishing for a break than a tear, because breaks tend to heal stronger than they were before. The body's incredible like that. But also you've got to be open-minded to the fact that the body has an incredible ability to heal. And a lot of my families that I work with just don't have that attitude. They think like, oh, you had one injury. Yeah, you're probably going to get that again. And their doctors have probably fed that to you as well. It doesn't have to be the case. Okay. There's examples of athletes in this world who have had injuries and people said, no, you're done. It's never going to work again. And then they've gone on to greater and greater and greater performances. And the critics are kind of like, what the hell do I know? Right. So you got to be thinking like that. So the other thing that I will share is finding a strength and conditioning coach in your area that has a kind of mobility performance background. Okay. So there's a guy by the name of Gray Cook, who I believe is a doctor. He's a doctor of physical therapy. He's because I think so. And he has a phenomenal book that none of you will going to want to read. It's massive, but the idea, Gray Cook created what was called the functional movement screen. Now people have their exceptions about the functional movement screen or whatever, but the functional movement screen got kind of caught up in the world of strength and conditioning coaches. And so if you can find a strength and conditioning coach in your area that has gone through like functional movement screen training, or at least has awareness of it, they are oftentimes a better help to your aspiring athlete than a physical therapist or even a doctor. And no, they didn't go to school for 8 years. No, they don't have some degree. No, they don't have a white coat on. That some of them are like hardcore tattooed. They look like they've been in a motorcycle club, like whatever. They can often be your best bet to taking your athlete and turning them into someone who's bulletproof. When you think of your athlete on the field of play, they are applying force, whether that's to a racket, to a ball, through a set of skis. They're applying force through the ground, up through their body, and then they're doing something with it. That takes a lot of complex coordination and and back to the when your hammer everything looks like a nail. There are people who love their physical therapist and they'll only ever go to a physical therapist. There's some people that love chiropractic and everything. If they can't pee and they've got a kidney stone, they go to a chiropractor, right? Like there's also naturopaths, which are uh, very alternative thinking, but but naturopaths will do testing that no other doctors will do for your athlete. And and any of these people who don't ask your athlete how much sleep they've gotten in the last like 21 days is really missing a big part of the big piece of the puzzle here. Okay. So I want to encourage you to be open to these types of things, to dismiss, not dismiss, but when you hear the, again, that middle class athlete think that's in most forums and most groups, realize that no, the answer isn't just to run to your local orthopedic doctor. Even if they're a sports doctor, I can't tell you how many sports doctors I've been so disappointed by because they are only trained in really one very narrow path. And so knowing that, if I see one of them, I have to take their advice with a grain of salt, and then I have to go find somebody else, right? Not only do I need to find somebody else I'm not looking for a differing opinion. I'm not looking for your opinion that just suits my own thoughts and fears and considerations. I want to find a conflicting like approach so that I now have something to work with. Okay. I I want you to avoid like I can't say this enough. I don't want your athlete to buy into the general ideas that, oh hey, you know um athletes just wear out. That's athletes have miles on their joints. Because why? There's athletes out there that have plenty of miles on their joints. Like how many of you have seen somebody like playing basketball or playing tennis um, at much like in their 50s and 60s and 70s, and you wonder like how the hell are you doing that? They may be blessed, right? Or gifted with a set of joints. But there are proactive things you can do physically, mobility wise, dietarily to basically protect your investment. And that investment's your athlete. Okay. And really, um, there's a lot of athletes, with the exception of like our most professional athletes, so professional tennis players, uh, top professional ice hockey, baseball. Um, I'll throw ski in there. Every sport has athletes who are making a lot of money and then can invest in their body. But resources are something that every athlete should take seriously. And you just do the best with what you can. Okay, so time, energy, and money. I remember a couple years ago, the name's gonna escape me, but he played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Harrison was his last name. He's a lineman. He actually played for the Patriots for a season. But this dude is just a beast, and just an absolute beast. And he was quoted as saying he spends about $1 million a year on his body. Well, when you're making 7 or 12 or whatever he was making a year, that's a pretty good return on your money. Athletes like Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal, like they're all investing in their body, whatever level whatever level your athlete's at, even if they're just like a high school athlete, you've got to invest in their body because I've got a lot of parents who invest more in their athletes' equipment, tennis rackets, skis, lacrosse sticks, soccer cleats, than they do in massage therapy or massage therapy is a big one, or vitamins or anything like that, right? So you've got to kind of look holistically and go, okay, one, how can we keep our athlete from getting injured? Yes, Ellis Redford, right? Yep, ran that touchdown back for Super Bowl. He didn't score, did he? Didn't he get tackled right like at the 1 yard line, or did he score? That was the one against the Cardinals, right? Loved that game. Um, but the idea is that you need to look at this and go like, all right, listen. Let's say you're listening to me now and your athlete's injured. You go like, okay, that sucks. Let's look up to the previous 30, 60, 90 days and wonder like what could we see this coming now? Are you tired? Are you fatigued? Are is there stress going on? Have you got enough sleep? Have you been eating well? Right? Did you feel weird, not solid? Like, 'cause sometimes some injuries come out of the blue. I get it. ACL injuries are like that, or anything else like that. So it could be this like all of a sudden it's pop, and you're like, dang, what the hell? But usually it comes down to some sort of strength and conditioning issue that could have been solved, right? And that's hard to swallow, but it's important to understand. The other idea is like when you look at other athletes in other sports. So like a lacrosse player can look at a soccer player, a tennis player can look at a soccer player, an ice hockey player can look at a soccer player. Like I keep going soccer here, but really when you look at the amount of miles on an athlete and you go like, to me, tennis athletes probably take the biggest beating running on concrete all day, right? I'm sure Jason here would agree with that. You know, so what about a soccer player? We've got soccer players playing well into their late 20s and 30s, right? And they're surviving. So how much of this is attitudinal, right? How much of this is like, oh, I was injured once before, it's bound to happen again. I'm just waiting. Oh, we're just waiting for it. I'm as lucky it didn't happen today, right? So a lot of it can be added to attitudinally. So don't let that be you, okay? As a parent, make sure you're not saying things like, hey, it's bound to happen, or, my athlete's injury prone, or, whatever. You can fill in the blanks wherever you'd like to. But the idea here is this watch your attitude towards injuries. Okay. The body does not have to wear out. Get Dave Asprey's bulletproof books to learn about that. Get Mark Sisson, any of his work at the Primal Blueprint. marksdailyapple.com is another good one. Okay, there's tons of resources there just to learn about like how can we make our athlete bulletproof, but also for the parents listening to me now, how can we make you bulletproof, right? How can we make you better, right? Because as my friend Ryan Hurst at gmb.io says, he goes, listen, it's all about having a long, successful, physically active life, right? And sports can do a number on us. Like I mean, I'm 3 years post-op and I'm finally getting back to a point where I feel like almost normal, but I still got a lot to go. But we're going to make sacrifices for our sport, but they don't have to be life altering. Like I just think attitudinally, I wish I had a better attitude when I was younger, knowing like what could I have done to maintain joint integrity so I could survive more experiences, not feel beat up and worn out and things like that. So if you take the approach with your athlete that they're going to have and I don't care what your sport is, what your athlete plays. If you can take this attitude that my athlete is going to have a long, successful career in this sport, your training will shift, right? Your training will shift. You will no longer be worried about like the next event, the next tryout, the next tournament, the next race. You'll be like, okay, I'm progressing my body in a path to have a long, successful career in this sport. And you might surprise yourself because it may be some others too. We've seen that before where athletes do have a nice, long, successful career in one sport and then they shift. Okay. So, Chris Kunkel writes, Coach is probably right. MDs will always err on the side of caution to protect themselves. Exactly. Or Chris, I'll add that sometimes I think what MDs will do is they'll just completely abdicate responsibility. They'll just be like, yeah, whatever. You're an athlete. You do your thing. But yeah, but for the most part, if they're leading with that worry of getting sued and all that, that's going to drive a lot of their decisions, and that's unfortunate. So thanks for that. So listen, everybody, thanks for watching. Do me a huge favor, share this with somebody, somebody who needs to hear it. Warn them that it's a little bit different than what they're probably used to, but I'm just here to share. And like I said, like I heard a story of some lady who like, yeah, she took her daughter to a doctor. The doctor had said, no, you need to rest. Your daughter has shin fractures. She continued to play to the point where she like had numbness in both her feet. That's just dumb. Okay. But no, sometimes that when your coach pushes you or pushes your athlete, they're just trying to get them to a standard, right? Near around what it is they see on a daily basis. You can't begrudge a coach for that. Like when people throw coaches under the bus and say, "Oh, that coach should be fired. He should never work again." I'm like, you just don't get it. You don't want a coach like that. You want a coach who's going to be there to push your athlete. Your athlete needs the awareness though to go, this doesn't feel right. And you, as the parent and the athlete, need to have the relationship with that coach to go like, whoa, wait, we're being like, this isn't some like flighty thing. Cause there's a lot of athletes, unfortunately, who take advantage of this. And at the first sign of trouble, at the first sign of stress for them, they're like, oh, I can't, I'm injured, I'm out. And the coach is like, dude, I'm wasting my time with you. That is a valid response from that coach, right? It's like the kid who cries wolf, right? Right. You can't misuse the trust of your coach. But if you have a relationship with your coach and you've nurtured that relationship, you can have um, a much better understanding. If you watch, I think it's on Prime, the Andy Murray documentary. Okay, it is brilliant to see for for that middle class athlete to like think every athlete should see that and understand what he went through as an athlete dealing with pain, a professional tennis player, won Wimbledon, only to then decide to have surgery, had surgery at that doctor that I called, by the way, um, and then to try and come back for it, to see how a team is managed around a professional athlete. Even if you're just a dad with a daughter or a dad with a son trying to make it to college, you could benefit from watching that level of thinking because your athlete needs that level of awareness to avoid accidents, to avoid injuries, and then to avoid trips to doctors and so on that necessarily aren't going to serve you. Okay. So listen, if you're listening to me now, if you could do me a huge favor, just hit the like button wherever you are, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Just leave me a comment, a like, or whatever. Just hit that little the little blue thumb at the top. That'd be super helpful. And by all means, if you got a question for me, if you like this, leave me a comment. That feedback's awesome. If I missed something you wish I had covered, leave me a comment. And you can always email me, coachedwards@athletespecific.com. And Ellis writes, thanks so much. This was one of my favorite topics so far. Great info. And yes, I've heard the middle class think all the time. Thank you for the info. Ellis, man, you're awesome. Congrats to your daughter, right? Kicking butt, taking names. You're a good dad. To all the dads listening to me now, you're good dads. All the moms listening to me now, you're good moms too. But man, but think big. Like, think big. A lot of the problems that people face in sport will go away if they just think bigger and just go like, you know what, we're going to do this. Like, we're going to be a pro. We're going to play D1. We're going to go to the Olympics. Whatever it is for you, man, when you just aim at that, everything else will come right behind it. If you just think like, "Oh, we'll see how it goes. We'll see, whatever. We'll just play it by ear." You're going to run into a mess. Okay? You're going to run into a mess. All right? So, enjoy this one. Thanks for all the feedback, guys. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.